Hey there, welcome back to another video. This time around, it is my review of the 1986 horror sequel, Poltergeist II, The Other Side. Now, Poltergeist 2 is nowhere near as good as its predecessor. It's definitely a step down in pretty much every way, shape, and form. But that doesn't mean that it's not a fun film. Like, this is still, in my opinion, a pretty solid sequel. And it honestly is better than it has any right being, considering a lot of the circumstances, and considering the fact that Poltergeist is never really a film that, to me personally, really needed a sequel. So it's one of those movies where, things wrapped up in a way that was very conclusive and satisfying, and it never really felt like, oh, I need to see more of the freaky feelings, and I need to see another one. Um, you really felt like, oh, I just want to watch the movie again. But you never felt like, oh, I want to see another movie with the Freelings, but in a different adventure. But when you see the final product, because of the strength of the family and the dynamic of the cast that was already previously established in the first film and done in a way that was just really great, you already have a pretty good nucleus here. And as a result, you have a sequel that doesn't necessarily have to, let's just say, overcompensate too much. And as a result, fall apart because it's trying too hard to equal the first film or surpass it. It never really feels like that kind of movie. It does feel more like a continuation of the first film, but just uh, a few years later, where the Freelings are older now and they're in a different location and they're once again faced with the supernatural horror, but it's a familiar horror, but with what at the time was an unfamiliar face because they didn't really have a face of the horror, just glimpses of the beast, but not anything they could really fully focus on. And the sequel provides that face, and it's equally as horrifying as the spectral spindly horror that you saw in the first movie that roared like a lion. Um, and there are other elements of the movie that are thrown in there that I think also expand upon things enough to make it a worthwhile sequel. I really don't feel that it's as bad as some people make it out to be, especially in comparison to the remake from 2015 or Poltergeist 3. It's directed by Brian Gibson, who is no Toby Hooper. He is no Steven Spielberg, but he's serviceable enough. He's decent enough, especially when it comes to the scenes involving the supernatural and the visual effects and shooting on location and in a set. When it comes to scenes that are supposed to be really spectacular and really pop visually and it's supposed to be spooky or scary, have this sort of haunted funhouse vibe to them. I feel the direction is pretty solid. When it comes to the more emotional scenes, though, when it's not involving anything like Craig T. Nelson being possessed by the tequila worm, it's not as effective visually as the first film was. I think that's maybe because Brian Gibson is not necessarily as well learned in how to direct those scenes as someone like Steven Spielberg. Um, so there's moments in this that, like the stuff with the grandmother and when she passes away, or the scenes with Diane and she's having visions. Those scenes just kind of don't necessarily have the same palpable heart and soul to them. Like they do the soul that those scenes are trying to provide do come across as a little more artificial than they do genuine. And another thing is there are some really nice effective moments of genuinely chilling horror, But then there's other moments where it is very much more of an effects showcase. And while the first film was that at times, it wasn't to the extent that this film is, especially at the end of the movie, where the Freelings are transported to the other side and they're floating around in this realm of sorts, and they're attacked by the beast. And even some of the stuff prior to that with Taylor and the Medicine Man and the Vision Quest and so on. There are certain moments in this visually where it does look a little off. I got to be honest, and I don't know if it's necessarily something that I blame Brian Gibson for, or just something that the film just has an issue with inherently because of the way that it's structured. From a storytelling perspective, it's one of those things where it was just kind of inevitable. It was going to be a pitfall that any director was going to have to try to overcome. But yeah, it is one of those movies at times where it is kind of inconsistent visually. Sometimes it'll look really good, other times it'll look kind of cheap. And I kind of do I think that that's a part of that reason is the director, Brian Gibson. I mean, he had directed some stuff before this. I mean, this wasn't his directorial debut, for instance, if I remember correctly. Um, but a lot of the stuff that he directed was dramas. He didn't really do horror. In fact, even after this, he really didn't do much horror, it seems like. So I think that also might have been part of it, is that he didn't really he wasn't really a horror director like Toby Hooper, so he wasn't really able to showcase the horror in the same way that Toby was able to do with his shot selection or his camera angles or so on. And he wasn't even necessarily as much of a horror director as Steven Spielberg, because Spielberg did some films like Duel and Jaws that were very suspenseful and had a lot of tension. Brian Gibson really didn't do films like that. So this was kind of his first foray into making that kind of film. And at times, he does kind of trip over his own feet sometimes because he's running into those obstacles for the first time. But it's still a decently enough directed film. I still think it still has some moments where, okay, he really allows the effects to wow the audience. He really allows the film to pop visually. But yeah, there are some other scenes where it just doesn't really have the same spectacle as the first movie, despite the fact that it has arguably even more visual effects. And then you have the script by Michael Gress and Mark Victor, who return to write the sequel. And I feel the familiarity that they have with the first film is a really good feather that this film has in its cap, so to speak, because you have screenwriters who aren't new to things, aren't just starting from scratch, and they understand what makes Poltergeist what it is, what made Poltergeist so great. They understood that the star of Poltergeist was not the ghosts, wasn't the visual effects. It was the family. It was the Freelings. And they understand that they should be brought back. They shouldn't be replaced by some new family and some new supernatural occurrences. They should be back and they should be facing a familiar foe. I think having the beast return, especially in the capacity and the way that it does here, I think is a really good move. Attaching a human face to the evil and Reverend Cain is a really solid bit of writing. It makes the beast a much more intricate and much more interesting character and a much more menacing foe, because now it's not just this vague ethereal figure. Now there's this human evil that's associated with it. And I do feel, though, that there are some elements of the script that are a bit lacking. For one, I do feel that there are moments in this emotionally that are a bit too schmaltzy. Where in the first movie, those moments came across as more genuine. Here it comes across as more forced. It's not just due to what Brian Gibson does behind the camera, it's also due to what's in this script. I mean, the ending of the film, for instance, with Carol Ann being saved by an angel that's her grandmother. Like, yeah, it's sweet, but at the same time, it is very sugary sweet. And that just seems like something that is even a little bit too sweet for the Poltergeist series. And it undermines a lot of the genuinely just horrifying stuff in this script, like the tequila worm and Reverend Kane and a lot of this other stuff. When it just like one of the last shots is this schmaltzy Lifetime movie of the week kind of stuff. They also, the two writers, there are some moments where the horror, even though there are scenes with the horror where it really does work, there's other moments where it does feel like they're not trying that hard, and it just comes across as a little weak. And then there's other moments too where I feel the structure is a bit off. For instance, I don't understand why Craig T. Nelson's character Steven goes on this vision quest with Taylor and gets the smoke before he has his bout with the tequila worm. To me, that's just not a good structure to the story, because you would think that he would have a little bit more strength after that, that he would be able to, you know, resist the bottle a little bit more, but he doesn't. So it just makes it seem like that whole experience really wasn't as impactful as it should be. And I understand that there's a scene later on where he uses the smoke to send the spirit away and so on. But you can still have that set up in the same way, but you have the tequila monster, the vomit creature, you have that whole possession scene, him struggling with the bottle, him being possessed by Kane. You have that occur before he goes on the vision quest. He goes on the vision quest with Taylor because of the weakness that he showed when he was possessed by Kane. And that shows how much his family means to him, how much he wants to protect his family, and so on. And then after he does that, then the beast tries to come in and tries to mess with them again, and then he uses the smoke and sends the beast away. That's a better structure to me. And I think it really was kind of a no-brainer. So I don't understand what the two writers were thinking there, because it does undermine things. And I also don't understand what they were thinking when it comes to the climax of the movie. They go to Cuesta Verde, which is not a bad idea, going back to Cuesta Verde and going to the underground caverns and everything, and to where Kane locked away his followers and facing him on his own turf. But when they get to the supernatural, the other side, it's just this boring light show. Looks like something you would see, I don't know, like in an episode of maybe Star Trek the original series or something. It's just very disappointing. And then when you see the beast, it shows up, have the scene where it has this illusion that Carol Ann is dying, and then they get the spear and they throw it at the beast, and it dies and flies into the vortex, and that's it. It was a letdown. It really was. It was a letdown when it comes to the way that things were built up throughout the film. I mean, you had a more intense sequence in the garage with the chainsaw and everything in the garage coming to life and trying to attack the Freelings while they were in the car than you really had in the climax. Why not make it, you know, more of an extension of some nightmare world or something? Like, why did it have to be this just void of nothingness with lights and and the Beast. Like it just felt like it was not that well thought out. And I don't know if it was the fault of the writers or the fault of the visual effects artists or the fact that MGM was maybe kind of struggling and didn't have the money. I don't know what it was, but it just is one of those things where the film is definitely hurt by that. I'm not gonna lie. It's also hurt by the fact that there are certain characters that don't really have as much to do as you think they would. Like for example, Taylor. Taylor is set up really well initially with him working with Tangina, realizing, sensing that something is wrong, and the Beast is gonna come back, and he needs to help the Freelings, and he goes on this journey to help them, and it seems like he's in essence replacing Tangina's role in the first movie, but a lot of Taylor's scenes are just there for comic relief. He's the weird guy. He's the guy who thinks the car is angry, and that's kind of about it. Like there's a couple moments where, he's there. He does the vision quest with Steven. He's there in the climax, sets up the fire so they can travel to the other side. But throughout a good chunk of the story, he's not even there. He's nowhere to be found, which just seems like a missed opportunity when it comes to the writing. So does not having Tangina more involved. She's there, but also kind of not there because she really is just kind of there as a cameo more than anything. And I also feel that there's just other stuff involved with the movie that it really does feel like there's more they could do with some of this stuff. There's more they could have done with Reverend Kane. There's more that they could have done with definitely the climax, and they don't do that. And so it is kind of a letdown at times, mainly due to the writing. But it's not a bad script. Like I said, it's got a good setup. The fact that it's still focusing on the Freelings is a really good uh, um, choice. And for the most part, I think it does a good job really showing what they would realistically be doing after what happened in the first film. Living with a family member, struggling with trying to explain why their house disappeared, not having a TV still, only listening to the radio because of what happened in the first movie. And I also like the fact that Carol Ann isn't just taken again. Like she does get taken at the end of the movie, but they don't just take her like in the middle point of the film and just repeat the first film. I also like that about the script. I also like the way that it writes Robbie's character. Seems like he has a little bit more to do this time, and he has more of an arc where he's kind of a scaredy cat and is afraid, but then he becomes less afraid throughout the film, and he becomes more of a protector of the house and of his family. I like that. I think that's a good choice. Um, and I will once again reiterate the strength of Cain and the way that character is written. The God is in his holy temple. Just this almost unassuming guy, like this elderly preacher. Like you're thinking, oh, he just means well. He just wants to do, what's the best for his parish and for other people in his community. But the way that he's written and just the way that the character is set up, you always feel like there's something sinister there. Like there's just something off about this guy, and you just something evil that's just permeating under the surface. And then the script does a good job just shedding away pieces of Cain until it shows his true form. But yeah, it's a screenplay that when you really break it down, it is kind of a mixed bag at times. Also, there's a lot of moments that are just strictly just set up for jump scares and lazy jump scares at that. Like fake outs, dream sequences. The original Poltergeist, it didn't have dream sequences. There was hallucinations, but nobody was having a cliche nightmare scene. And it felt like there were too many moments like that in this script. But could have been a lot worse. Could have been Poltergeist 3. Could have been the Xerox screenplay in the Poltergeist remake. The film still has a really good cast. I mean, JoBeth Williams, Craig T. Nelson, can never go wrong with those two. They still have really great chemistry. They still work very well together. And it's still fun to see them. It really is. Because I like those two actors, and I really like the characters of Stephen and Diane. And I like that Diane, she's given an extra bit of intrigue to her character where she's clairvoyant, which you kind of got a little gist of maybe that she was more open to that anyway in the first movie, with how she was more open to the poltergeist when it was starting to do various different things throughout the house. And well, it doesn't necessarily give her as strong of an arc as the first film. I still think it's good enough. And I think the fact that the arc really is just more of the family as a whole, that they realize that they are stronger together than apart. And this is very evident when it comes to the sequences where Diane is struggling with Steve when he's possessed by Cain. You could just see the splinters that were showing up with those two characters. It was genuinely heartbreaking because of just how great of a job the actors did in terms of bringing those two characters to life. And of course, can't talk about those two without talking about Craig T. Nelson. And I really enjoyed him in this. I even really liked his back and forth with Will Sampson's character Taylor. Yeah, this car is pissed. I really like that back and forth, and he had a little more difficult role this time around because not only was he doing the stuff where he's trying to prove that he's a valuable protector and you know the man of the house and so on, but also he had to show that he could believably portray someone who's possessed, and in a way that's not goofy or silly or dumb. And instead he did it in a way that was really harrowing and genuinely spooky, like very eerie, the way that he portrayed his character when it was possessed by the spirit of Cain. Honestly, one of the better acting performances in the film is in that scene with Craig T. Nelson. It was also just an unbelievable trooper having to deal with that effect of the vomit creature. I mean, that was rough. If you read into what Craig T. Nelson had to deal with when it comes to that effect shot, you would want to buy him a drink. You would want to buy him more than one drink, considering everything that he went through shooting that scene. But yeah, Craig T. Nelson was terrific, as always. Oliver Robbins is Robbie, better here to me than he was in the first film. You could tell that he had a little bit more time to work on his craft as an actor and a little bit more experience, and that definitely did pay off here. And it helped that his character just had more to do, so there was more for him to work with. But I definitely don't feel that he would be necessarily as good if he didn't have more seasoning, so to speak. So that definitely did help. Heather O'Rourke, I mean, what can you say? I mean, just precocious, just as likable, warm, and just charismatic. And you really did like her. You wanted her to find a way somehow to escape this horror yet again. Zelda Rubinstein, basically extended cameo, did good with what little she had to work with. Will Sampson as Taylor, I thought he was tremendous. I really liked his performance in this. That's why I wish he didn't just disappear for good portions of the story, because I liked that character so much. And I felt that he really worked well with the rest of the cast, had a good dynamic with the kids as well as the adults in the cast. And you got Geraldine Fitzgerald as Grandma Jess. Fine for the kind of character that she's playing. You know, the lovable, spirited grandma who's sweet and and just very personable in that way. Um, Definitely somebody that you would want to have as your grandmother, you know, that kind of vibe. And then you definitely have Julian Beck. Julian Beck as Henry Kane, just absolutely horrifying. A horrifying performance, but in a good way. You really were intimidated by this guy. Like, you legitimately felt like he was some kind of evil presence that was not to be messed with. Like the scene where he says, "You're all gonna die in there," still gives me chills. And in large part, it's because of the fact that Julian Beck gave everything that he had left in his body and his soul to this performance, because it was his final performance. He was deathly ill. He was dying. He delivered a really powerful performance and did so while he was essentially on death's door. That's impressive. I don't care who you are. Like, the man was in pain. He was skin and bones. He was not long for this world. But he just showed up on set and was a true professional and just gave this role everything that he had. And as a result, I personally feel that he definitely made an impact. He made an impression. And despite how nasty the character is that he played, I think it was mostly a positive impression that he made in a lot of people. I think Julian Beck's legacy lives on in a lot of ways because of what he brought to this film. And speaking of bringing things to this movie, there are other technical aspects of the production that are also good, if not great. I mean, it's got some nice looking cinematography by Andrew Laszlo, the editing by Thom Noble. It's a noble job. It's good. The music by Jerry Goldsmith. I think it's just as special and just as spectacular as his work in the first film. Uh, I like the music that he did for Taylor and the more uh, Native American infused theme. I like how he incorporates the main theme from the first film in this score, and I like the score that he did for Cain, the God is in his holy temple bit. So overall, really good score. And the film also features some genuinely spectacular visual effects by Industrial Light and Magic, uh, which are just a real treat to see. They really are. Not any CGI, all done for real, all done practically. Also, some really good makeup effects, like the moment with the cane creature, which is on the bottom here, where you had Noble Craig, who was actually an amputee. He was in this makeup and flopped around on the floor and ran away and smiled at the camera. Like, that was a really good bit of practical effects. The vomit creature, and which that's what that ultimately was. Like, the final form of the vomit creature was Noble Craig in the suit, but prior to that, it was this just bulbous, just slimy thing. And yeah, just a lot of different things about this film when it comes to the visual effects are definitely a real standout. Look really good. Even some of the matte painting work. Definitely a film that a lot of ways was even more of an effects showcase as the first film, but the effects were so spectacular and so well done that it was still a worthwhile experience just to see those effects and to see what the folks at Industrial Light and Magic were able to cook up for this sequel. Now, the film is definitely shorter, and I think that definitely helps the film. I don't think there's enough meat here. I don't think there's enough strong elements when it comes to storytelling or characters or depth to really be a longer film. So I think it definitely had the right idea being a shorter movie. And for the most part, it goes by at a pretty quick pace, and it's a fun movie. It really is. It's got some dark moments. It's got some intense scenes, and it is a bit of a letdown at times, especially when it comes to the climax. And the fact that you don't really see as much of H.R. Giger's design for the Beast on screen as you would like. But it's still a solid sequel. I really do feel that way. I think it's one of the better horror sequels of the 80s. And it's the last good Poltergeist film. Because after this, it was just nothing but downhill. And mostly crap, to be honest. But anyway, thanks for watching my review of Poltergeist 2 The Other Side. And until next time, I'll see you later. See ya.